What COVID really exposed about us. On December 31st, 2019, a new virus was first detected in Wuhan, China. It would later be called the novel coronavirus and nicknamed COVID-19. As it traveled the world, it began killing innocent people worldwide. As of the date of this recording, there is still no known cure, but a confirmed 16.4 million people have been infected, and a staggering 652,000 have passed away from this disease. While some countries handled the pandemic better than others, one of the hotspots of the coronavirus was here in the United States, with 4.37 million infected and over 150,000 deaths, making the U.S. stand at 23% of the global death toll. As of the date of this recording, these numbers sadly continue to climb. While there is blame to be passed around in our politics, from governors who encourage their population to not wear masks or other PPE, to other politicians who chose to play politics rather than compromising for the good of their people, today we aren't going to focus on who is to blame, but rather we're going to focus on what other, much larger problems this pandemic exposed. The first of these was in the education sector. In mid-February 2020, as COVID-19 was first affecting the United States, individual schools around Washington State and New York State were being temporarily shut down for thorough cleanings. On February 25th, the CDC issued a warning to schools about the pandemic, and by February 27th, the first school in the U.S. was shut down entirely. By March 12th, Ohio became the first state in the nation to announce statewide closing, followed shortly after by 15 other states. By March 16th, that number rose to 27 states, and on March 25th, 2020, Idaho became the final state to shut down their schools. But as we saw schools close, we also saw school districts and educators trying to figure out how to provide their services to their children, and this went far beyond basic education. An estimated 22 million low-income children participate in the National School Lunch Program on a typical day. So school districts had to figure out on their own how they would provide one meal a day to 22 million children. As for an education, some schools were lucky enough to be a part of a government grant provided to them years ago, which allowed them to provide each student with a laptop or an iPad, which they could take home every day with them. But many schools were never a part of this program and never got these grants years ago. So as schools rushed towards online learning platforms, such as Zoom and Google Classroom, many schools were left without any online options. What's worse is if you look at school districts like my alma mater, Pottsville Area School District. They got this grant years ago and now provide each student with some technology, which they are allowed to take home with them every day. But technology is only so good if that device has access to the internet. And for up to 9.4 million children, they live in a home without any access to the internet. Even that estimate isn't considering homes with basic internet plans. As an internet broadcaster, I'm well aware that in order to use platforms like Zoom or other video conferencing applications, which provide schools with virtual classrooms or group video calls for group projects, a home needs more than just the basic home internet plan. This means the number of children in the U.S. which don't have access to high-speed internet is much higher. Many internet advocacy groups estimate this number to be more than 12 million. While many will say the coronavirus pandemic exposed these fatal flaws in our infrastructure, the truth is that the virus actually exposed far more in just the education system. As schools shut down due to the safety concerns for their students and their staff, the true fatal flaw in the system was that there was no plan at all. School districts far and wide had to come up with a plan of their own for their own school district. In Pennsylvania alone, there is a statewide plan of action for schools to follow to keep their students safe from active shooters. Every school in the state must abide by certain regulations, and some schools chose to go far beyond the state mandates to hopefully protect their students further. And even in cases where an active shooter comes to a school, there is massive training done and protocols to follow for schools to ensure as many students as possible make it out of that situation alive. But this begs the question, why a plan of action isn't in place for a pandemic or a quarantine? We've heard our elected officials talk about the possible risk of some terrorist group targeting a school in the United States. In theory, there is a plan to handle this situation, where a school needs to go into quarantine, and surrounding schools would have to do online learning for a while because of the threat. But this begs the question, where was this plan back in March? So the coronavirus may have exposed the fact that there was no plan at all to transition a school from classroom learning to online learning. Or at the very least, it exposed the fact that if a plan existed, it wasn't used when it was desperately needed. And this only furthered the public's despair for how their school districts were handling the situation. Many school officials were being asked why their school's plan of action was far more dangerous to their children's lives than the school district next door to them. The true answer would have been a statewide plan, or better yet, a federal plan of action, which every school was mandated to follow. Moving on from education, the coronavirus exposed fatal flaws in our employment sector as well. On March 27, 2020, the president signed into law the CARES Act, which provided each American with a $1,200 check per adult and a $500 check per child. Under the same CARES Act, each American who was jobless or was financially impacted by the pandemic from working less hours, they were eligible for state unemployment. Before this federal act, states like Pennsylvania didn't offer unemployment to self-employed individuals like myself if our job was suddenly gone or massively affected. That was the risk we took as small business owners. But thanks to the CARES Act, states were now required to help self-employed people as well as those employed by another company. The CARES Act also provided each unemployment claimant with an additional $600 per week stimulus check. This check encouraged everyone besides essential employees to stay home as much as possible, which would hopefully flatten the curve for our healthcare industry. And in places like Pennsylvania, it did flatten the curve, and it worked. Now, I will admit, there are massive flaws in the Pennsylvania unemployment system, with self-employed folks like myself still waiting on back pay for our first few weeks of benefits from this program. And even sadder is the fact that Pennsylvania is actually doing a better job than most states when it comes to unemployment filings. But the biggest flaw in the unemployment system is actually yet to come. On July 25th, 2020, this extra $600 per week stimulus check ended, and it had many people wondering if it would be extended and for how much per week that extension would provide. As of the date of this recording, we still don't know if there is an extension which will officially pass. But in the meantime, it has many Americans criticizing the fact that essential workers are being paid the same, while many unemployed folks are getting paid more now than they ever were before. So this brings up two big issues. The first of which is the question, why didn't the CARES Act provide massive financial aid for the essential workers on the front lines? Why weren't the nurses and doctors compensated with the same stimulus check that unemployed folks like me got every week? In truth, it was only because of their job title that they didn't qualify for this $600 per week benefit, and that isn't fair at all. And for friends of mine like Becca, who is an essential worker in a warehouse delivering groceries to stores, and whom you've seen on our show before, why was she paid less than I was when she was working 5 days a week, and I was allowed to stay home and work on a YouTube channel, which wasn't required of me to get the $600 per week check? And it was only because of the kindness from her employer that all of their warehouse workers got a slight raise while working through the pandemic. But the second flaw in the unemployment sector is the fact that so many people are complaining about the $600 per week stimulus check. Many people are justifiably angry that unemployed folks are getting paid more during the last few months than they were getting paid before the pandemic started. And for that extra cash, they are required to do far less work. Essentially, people are angry that unemployed folks will never find the desire to go back to the workforce if they are getting paid more through unemployment benefits to stay at home. And to be honest, this was the whole point of the $600 per week extra check. This kept everyone safer at home. But while we are far from out of the woods on this pandemic, the fact remains that many people are still being paid more to stay at home than they were before the pandemic started. But my question is, doesn't this also bring to light the fact that so many Americans were paid less than a living wage before the pandemic started? It is estimated that around 13 million Americans have more than one job. And this is partly due to the fact that most middle-class jobs only pay a minimum wage. For some states like Pennsylvania, our minimum wage is the exact same as the federal minimum wage of $7.25 per hour. And when you consider most jobs try to keep their employees to 35 hours per week or less in order to get out of paying them benefits, each employee walks away from a 35-hour per week job with just $13,195 per year. By the way, this is just barely above the federal poverty level of $12,760 per year. So for many people collecting unemployment due to the coronavirus pandemic, their weekly pay is severely higher than it was before the pandemic started. When you add the $600 per week in stimulus federal money, plus the $195 per week state unemployment funds, you got $795 per week. It was no comparison at all to the $253.75 you got from your minimum wage job working 35 hours a week. Oh, and this $253 per week didn't account for federal, state, or local taxes, which are taken out of your paycheck before you ever see any net profit from your labor. And this is my point. Rather than complaining about the fact that unemployed people are getting paid more money now than they ever were before, why can't we realize that the coronavirus exposed the fact of how little Americans actually get paid on a weekly basis? Why did it take a global pandemic for many Americans to actually earn a livable wage? But far more important than the education or employment flaws are the flaws this pandemic exposed in our healthcare system. While many are quick to point out the low percentage of people who are fatally infected with the coronavirus compared to the number who recover, our healthcare system crumbled from this pandemic. Can you imagine how much it would crumble with a pandemic with a higher death rate? In the healthcare industry, there were 3 load-bearing pillars which didn't stand up to this pandemic. The first of these was the sheer cost for the average person. For many folks like myself, we get our health insurance privately or through the healthcare.gov website. But many high-cost health insurance plans, like mine, still require us to pay deductibles and high copays. And to explain this, I think it's best to use an example. Back in March 2020, I was filming basketball games for a local TV station. On March 10th, I was filming a game in Bethlehem, PA. And on March 11th, I was filming in Reading, PA. By March 12th, both of those schools were shut down for possible coronavirus infections. And by March 14th, I was in the hospital with severe chest pains and trouble breathing. I had many of the symptoms of coronavirus, which is why they tested me for it. But I was terrified of going to the hospital because I knew I would have to pay my copay. So I spent the previous few days and all morning on the 14th trying to fight through the pain. When I eventually went, they tested me and it later came back that I just had another infection, which was treatable through an inhaler. But that inhaler had a $50 copay, which I didn't have the funds to pay for because I just paid the hospital copay. So I had to wait a few days more to get paid in order to afford the inhaler copay, which again I desperately needed. I will say that a few weeks later they refunded the emergency room copay because it was COVID related, but they still charged me an x-ray fee on top of the emergency room fee, because as you walk into different rooms for different testing, you're billed and forced to pay different people. Most people would assume that when you walk into the emergency room, everything will be covered by your emergency room copay, but it's not. Most other things in the hospital are actually billed separately. And while I want to remind you that after a few days on that inhaler, I was fine, and again, I did not have the coronavirus, this story points out the fact that for many people, going to the hospital, even with insurance, is a huge financial burden. And because of that burden, some people, even those with the coronavirus infection, choose to not even go to the hospital when they truly need that care. Many others, like me, chose to fight through that pain until it is unbearable. It was purely a financial decision for me to go to the hospital, when it should have been a no-brainer. I needed medical help, and I should have been able to go to any hospital to get that help without thinking about the cost. But that is what the coronavirus exposed. The fact that for many Americans living with no insurance, they know they'll go bankrupt if they need to go to the hospital for any reason. For others who have insurance, we know that going to the hospital is a massive burden for months or years to come. And for many people, this bankruptcy or financial burden isn't something they want to put on their loved ones. So if someone gets infected with the coronavirus, and if they are in a bracket which is more likely to not survive the coronavirus, they might choose to not get the help they need, because even after they die, the hospital can keep coming after their loved ones, asking to be paid in full. The second pillar of the healthcare industry, which failed, was the lack of supplies. For this pandemic, we were in desperate need of ventilators, masks, gloves, and other PPE gear. Even General Motors and Tesla were helping make these items because the demand was so high. But it wasn't just small equipment which we were in desperate need of during this pandemic. It was the hospitals themselves. Companies near me, such as Mountain Productions in Wilkes-Barre, PA, started turning their live event staging and trussing equipment into mobile hospitals, which they set up outside of brick-and-mortar hospitals. These mobile hospital units allowed the hospital to handle hundreds of more patients at a time. And while I massively applaud companies like this for innovating and helping in the pandemic efforts, the fact that mobile hospitals were needed shows you how vastly underprepared our healthcare industry was for such a disaster. And the final pillar which fell during this pandemic in the healthcare sector was how we handled all of the dead. There are two images which are the most haunting from this pandemic, and I will warn you to skip ahead if you don't want to see them. But the first is a picture outside of a New York hospital, where they were literally stacking bodies in the back of a refrigerated tractor-trailer because they didn't know what to do with so many bodies. And the second is a picture of Hart Island in New York, which is an island mostly used for the worst pandemics in US history. The aerial image is of workers using heavy equipment to dig big enough graves for this pandemic. But these images show us just how underprepared we were for a disaster of this size. Through the pandemic, we have seen great innovation, but our healthcare industry saw major flaws from beginning to end. While the pandemic is still going on, our hearts and prayers are with the victims and their families. But I hope that at the end of this pandemic, we can learn a lot from this experience. We need better infrastructure so kids can have access to high-speed internet. We need a better way to ensure our kids can eat once a day and not starve, other than relying on our school lunch program. We need a plan in our education system so schools know what steps to follow if something bad were to happen again. We need to pay our workers vastly more so they aren't relying on the next global pandemic to pay them enough to buy groceries. We need to invest in our essential workers, like we did our unemployed. We need to invest in healthcare equipment, so the next time a disaster happens, nurses won't have to use school supplies to cover their face while treating patients. And maybe invest in equipment to ensure that doctors don't have to decide who lives and who dies just because their hospital doesn't have the basic supplies they need to treat everyone. And most importantly, rather than fighting over how we're going to get back to work or back to school, we need to burn those previous images into our heads of tractor trailers stacked full of bodies and heavy equipment digging grave sites because digging one at a time wasn't fast enough. Maybe then we'd stop marching on our Capitol buildings with signs and hashtags saying reopen our state. Maybe then we'd realize the biggest flaw which this pandemic exposed was not in our education system, nor was it in our employment sector, nor was it in our healthcare industry. The biggest flaw this pandemic exposed was the severe distrust the American people have with those sworn to keep us safe. As for now, that's all for our episode today. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this episode and want to support more content like this, please consider picking up some of our brand new merchandise on our store or pledging to our Patreon page, where you can get a ton of benefits. Just check out the links in the description. Don't forget to like this video, share your LGBTQ-friendly thoughts in the comments, hit that rainbow subscribe button so you don't miss out on new episodes of our show, and share this video with others. As always, I'm your host, Matt Haslam. This has been PBR. Have a gay day, everyone, and bye for now. Watch Powered by Rainbows Season 3, only on MHP TV.